everyone. It's Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcasts. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. I really appreciate you watching. Today, I have Mr. Mike Ford, who has graciously agreed to interview. He is a United States, he's Democrat Party candidate for the United States House of Representatives in Georgia's 9th District. Mr. Ford is a decorated Army veteran and served in the Vietnam conflict. He is an attorney, resides in Hall County, Georgia, and is married and is also a father and grandfather. Thank you very much for doing this, sir.
You're welcome.
So I'll get right to some questions. So what should Congress do, if anything, to control inflation?
Well, my view of inflation is rather simple. It tends to be a supply and demand problem. I'm not of the opinion that Congress can actually do much. Always you could reduce government spending in areas that's unnecessary, but I frankly don't think that anybody can do a great deal about inflation from a political perspective. It tends to be a supply and demand problem. God knows we've had enough problems in the last couple of years with COVID and everything else. I'm hopeful because gas prices are coming down, for example, but I think it's going to take a while to shake out. I've lived through a lot of inflation in my life, and I've seen it come and go. I remember when mortgage rates were 14%. And, it's just something that had to kind of work itself out. I wish that there was something I could think of. If there's somebody out there smarter than me that has an idea, I'd love to hear it.
Well, the ideas that I've heard, she says what causes this is monetary policy. The Fed has expanded the money supply and enabled Congress to spend. That's what's kept us afloat. So the idea is that Congress needs to stop spending so much. So what do you think about that concept?
Well, as you correctly point out, the fear was we were on the precipice of not a problem of recession, but a problem of going into depression when COVID came. And I agree. I think that, what we did was we threw as much money as we could at people to try to keep that from happening. I mean, we didn't want to go off an economic cliff, so to speak. Fed money policy is kind of, it gyrates from time to time. I don't think that the policy is as effective as people would like to believe it is. I mean, we see central bankers trying to do these things across the world with varying degrees of success. I just don't think that monetary policy works. I think fiscal responsibility is important, but I don't think it's the end all and be all.
Do you think, do you think Congress needs to balance budget? Do they need to pass a balanced budget, I should say?
That's a question to me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, a balanced budget is an idea that's unique to personal family concepts. People say, well, you have to balance your budget, so shouldn't the federal government balance their budget? Well, not necessarily. And there's a whole bunch of different reasons why that could be true. The federal government has incredible resources and incredible assets, land, government buildings, all kinds of things. But what we do as a society is we want to try to get certain things accomplished. We'd like for all of our people to do well. We'd like for everybody to be able to live indoors and have enough food to eat. So those things are not necessarily conducive to a balanced budget. On the other hand, I don't think crazy spending makes any sense either. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir. What do you see are the big issues that Congress needs to address?
Wow. Well, there are a great many. One of the problems that we face going forward as a nation is that we do not have the educated workforce that's going to lead us into the next 10 to 20 years. I point out that Make America Great Again and Build Back Better are really the same concept. And what it suggests is we're going back to someplace. Well, let me give a news flash to everybody. Coal mining isn't coming back. Neither are a lot of these things. Artificial intelligence, automation, excuse me, and all of these things are, they're coming with such rapidity that people don't know what to do. We need to figure out some way to get our people as educated as humanly possible. That's one of the things that Congress needs to do. The second thing is, as George Carlin famously pointed out, we don't have to worry about saving the planet. The planet's going to live. The problem is we may kill the ability of humans to reside on this planet. We have to do something about climate change. If we don't, frankly, we're not going to have a place to live. I don't know why that doesn't seem to be a gigantic concern to many people, but those are two things that I think Congress needs to address. I would consider those to be the big things that are coming that we need to be doing something about that we seem to be ignoring.
Regarding climate change, in this, I'm curious what your opinion is on this. I think of a lot of folks, maybe even Democrats too, but especially Republicans and independents, they hear that and they immediately think, well, then you can't have what's wrong with having higher and higher gas prices? I mean, that would be the fix, wouldn't it be? A big part of the fix. People can't afford gas, so they can't use it.
Well,
it cuts the usage down.
Well, the idea of economic Darwinism, I suppose, is certainly okay. And it's true that as prices go up, there would be less usage. I remember in 1964, when I was in Europe, I was astounded at the difference in gas prices there and here. So I don't know that the high cost of things makes a difference. One of the problems with people is we have to get motivated, and everybody seems to think that we can get motivated by pricing. And that has two bad aspects to it. Number one is less well-off people suffer dramatically, and sometimes the more affluent don't suffer at all. And then there's the problem with, well, all right, if the gas price goes up, does that cause us to use less? Well, maybe, but right now the public is demonstrating that isn't so, because they're using the heck out of gas. So I don't see that as a solution.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is just a concern for people to, when they hear this, I mean, do you see that side of it where people will say, well, if climate change is this big of a threat, I gotta live my life. I gotta get to work. I don't want to pay $5 a gallon. I don't want to pay $2.50. So they vote for the people that they think are going to more likely to accomplish that, right?
Wow. Well, if you go back and you look at history, which is useful, there are some islands in the Mediterranean that are now denuded because the people there cut down all the trees to make charcoal. The moral of this story is now the place is completely uninhabitable, and yet they knew if they did that, it would eventually become uninhabitable, but they did it anyway because that was what they always did. what I guess I'm trying to say is we're going to have to find new ways of approaching things because the old way doesn't work. And anybody that wants an object lesson in I have to have a job and my job is more important because I have to eat and all this. There's a poison called Kepone that was used in Virginia, as I remember. And because people wanted that income, they wanted to work at this company that made this stuff. They kept doing it. And really, it killed everybody there, including part of their families, because they carried this toxic stuff home on their clothes. And they knew that, excuse me, they knew this was coming, and yet they did it anyway. So I'm not saying that Americans have to be beaten over the head with this, but I think we have to have a really serious conversation about what's going to happen if we do nothing, and we have to work out serious solutions to these problems. Now, I'm not saying that I have the solution, but there are a lot of guys smarter than I am, and women, of course, who are addressing this in many different ways, including this so-called carbon tax idea, which I don't know if I advocate that strongly or not. I just don't know the detail.
Okay, just change subjects a bit. A lot of people in the House, members in the House, advocate ending the filibuster in the Senate. What do you think about that idea?
Well, that's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, I'm trying to remember my history. Seems to me the filibuster came about over segregation. I could be wrong about that. I don't really remember. The idea behind the filibuster is it keeps a majority, but not a substantial majority, from inflicting their ideas on a minority. The problem with getting rid of it, I suppose, is then whoever has the most votes wins. But wasn't that kind of the idea? I mean, that was the way the country's structured. Now, there's a lot wrong with the way the country's structured, particularly in the Senate, because the Senate is populated by people who do not represent the vast majority of Americans. It's disproportionate. For example, Idaho has 2 senators, as does Alaska, but so does a state like California or states like New York. So a lot of people consider that disproportionate. So some people feel like the filibuster helps check, I don't know that I want to say extremist, but certainly out of the mainstream idea. I don't personally, of course, if I go to Congress, I'm not going to have any control over that anyway. But there are a lot of pros and cons with the filibuster, and that's why you see so many people vacillating, I think.
It seems to me that whoever's in power wants to end it. Period.
Well, of course.
And then yeah,
Sure.
Of course. But the people hear this, and the politicians are lying to them because they don't mean it. In other words, a lot of the politicians are lying to them because they certainly would not have wanted to get rid of the filibuster while Donald Trump was in office. And let's say, for example, he's reelected. Well, they don't want it then; they just want it now.
Sure.
So they're lying to the people, is what I'm getting at.
Well, I mean, it's not an unheard of thing that politicians misrepresent things.
No, it's not. No,
But
it's not.
I mean, people say things and for silly reasons. I mean, wasn't it Dean Rusk who used to say that election was the silly season when people say silly, foolish things?
Sure.
So,
But of the silly things, that seems to me personally, that seems to be a particularly crass one, because they clearly do not mean what they're saying. So,
well, they do if it suits them at the moment. Sure.
Correct. But I mean, but they know, I guess what I'm getting at is you don't have to think through this very long to figure out that it doesn't mean anything. You talk about education. So this question, I thought this was a very interesting question On the primary ballot, this, I guess you call it advisory question. Should the United States remove obstacles to economic advancement by forgiving all student loan debt? This is on the Democratic primary ballot. 85% responded yes. What do you think about that concept?
Well, I don't know how that works. I'm trying not to wander off into another area, but we have a problem going forward with an educated populace. We have to educate the populace. We have to, whether it's formal education, as we would call it, or whether it's getting critical skills, plumbers, electricians, all of these kinds of things, technical people, all of that is essential. And yet we act like, well, I'm not sure we want to pay for that. And then you have the other side where I'm not too sure that even if we gave a forgiveness for everything, that would be bad, because maybe it would generate enough tax revenue by getting more people educated that it wouldn't make a difference. I haven't looked at those numbers, but I can tell you that if we don't do something about education, we're in trouble. And it's just crazy for these kids to come out of college, or some of them, they try to get through college and then they don't make it and they still have this huge debt. One thing that, I'll say something reactionary here, I'm going to upset everybody. I wonder if we shouldn't consider requiring something like a couple of years national service for everybody. And maybe you could tie forgiveness to that. I don't know. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying it's something I'm thinking about. When I came along, the draft was in effect. And a lot of other countries have similar ideas. I don't know that that's a solution, but right now we do forgiveness for people who teach and do other things. So maybe we need to do that. But if we don't do something about our population to get folks really, really educated, we've got working folks who are thinking, wait a minute, my job's getting exported, or my industry's collapsing. What am I going to do? We need to be addressing that, because if we don't, we're going to have a more serious problem than we do today. And frankly, I think a lot of Donald Trump's appeal, for reasons that escape me, but anyway, was talking to working folks about he was going to make it better. Well, that's a good idea. Didn't see it delivered, but it's a good idea. It's important. Does that answer your question?
I think so, but there's people will hear this and say, well, I've been fairly successful. I paid my own way. College, maybe I didn't even go to college. They're pretty successful, and they're saying this very, very generous benefit to forgive somebody's big loan. And what do you say to them? How do you explain that to them?
Well, what you're really saying is resentment. I understand, I don't like it if you're going to give Joe $1 million and give me nothing. I don't like it if I work hard and don't get it. I worked my way through school. Part of it was with the GI Bill. But I kind of feel like, 18 months in Vietnam kind of paid for some of that. But, it gets back to my question of, do we want to consider some kind of government service? I understand that there's no equitable way to look at it unless you consider that maybe that's what you ought to do for the benefit of everybody in your country. Maybe that's a sacrifice you should make because you didn't get your college repaid. I don't know. It's just a way of looking at it. And, if I have to pay for it and somebody else doesn't, is that fair or equitable? I don't know. It depends on a whole bunch of different factors. For example, are we all as a society going to benefit more than we're going to lose? It's very hard to calculate.
Change topic. What do you think of the Biden administration's immigration policy?
Wow, you mean the same disaster that we've had for the last 25 or 30 years? Yeah, I mean, I think the Biden administration is trying to deal with a difficult situation just like all the others. The one thing that astounded me was when John McCain helped come up with a reasonable solution, it seemed to me, everybody then turned around and ran away from it. Look, immigration right now is a nightmare. We don't know what to do about it. We can't get a consensus through the Congress. We can't seem to get a plan. You know, I don't want to throw rocks at Republicans, but, you know, I hear all the complaints, but I don't hear their plan either. And I go back to John McCain, you know, he thrashed out a plan and nobody would bite. I mean, it's like people don't want to accept the fact that it's complicated and hard and is going to have to result in a whole bunch of compromises over conflicting opinions and ideas. But, you know, to answer your question directly, I think that the Biden administration is struggling mightily with this problem, and they don't have good solutions. There aren't any good solutions, I don't think. And I think that's the problem. Everybody seems to think there's this panacea out there, but nobody seems to know what it is.
That's very interesting. What do you think about our tax policies? What would you change about them? The federal tax.
Well,
would you change federal tax rates, including the corporate tax rate?
Well, you know, the trickle down theory of economics is you know, nonsense. I mean, even Ronald Reagan's vice president called it voodoo economics. We've got a problem in the United States that a lot of people look at, and, you know, it goes back to that disparity we were talking about earlier. They look at these people who are earning, you know, millions, if not billions of dollars every year, and they feel like they're not paying their fair share. Well, I start out by reminding people it required a constitutional amendment to get a graduated income tax. And now we do have the ability to tax incomes and almost anything else if we want to. I think that an extremely wealthy income earner should pay a fair percentage of their income. How you do that, you know, the details and the devil always is there. How you do that is more complicated. I don't see a problem with it. In fact, people like Warren Buffett don't see a problem with it, and they make a lot of money. So I think we need to address it. I think a lot of Americans look at these things and say, how can it be that this big corporation or this, you know, wealthy person makes all of this money and you know, they're paying, you know, such a small percentage of their income compared to what I am paying in mine. And a lot of lower income folks realize that their tax burden is greatly disproportionate. For example, a lot of people don't realize how many taxes they're actually paying for the telephone they use, the gasoline they buy, the sales tax, and so forth. These things impact lower wage earners a lot more than they do the higher ones. And they feel like, you know, the higher ones should probably pay more. And I don't think that's wrong. I'll be on the same side with Warren Buffett on that.
So can you, I'm not really sure understood what would you change the rate from to? Can you quantify
Well,
what you're saying there?
I don't.
People want to vote they want to know this before they vote.
Well, let me put it to you like this. I feel like that incomes below 400,000 should be left alone. But above that, I would be in favor of increasing the tax rate. Now, I remind you and our listeners that at one time, the tax rate was 90%. That hadn't been that long ago. So the whole idea that this is confiscatory is not new, and we did change that. But I don't know that there's anything wrong with requiring, for example, somebody who's making a great deal of money to pay either a higher percentage or to pay a more dollar related number, if that makes sense to you. I don't have an answer to, I can't give you a number because I have not had the ability to study that. Presumably, we could come up with numbers, but I'm a data person. I want to see the data and figure out exactly where it would be. So I'm not going to tell you today that I would say 20% or 30% or 40% or whatever,
Increase.
because I have not studied that.
Right.
And it sounds to me like very few have, but anyway.
Well, the corporate tax rate, you keep that the same, or?
Well, here's the problem with the perception on the corporate tax rate. The first problem is corporations are artificial people, but they pay.
How do you mean artificial people?
Well, they're not real. It's an artificial thing. They don't exist as a person, but they exist because they are literally artificial. So when you ask a corporation to pay taxes, you have to understand how it works. And one of the ways that it works is they make money, which is a profit, and they are taxed on profits. But they also pay dividends, and dividends then go to the shareholders. So shareholders sometimes feel like, wait a minute, you taxed the corporation over here when it made the money, and now you're sending me a dividend. So now you're taxing it again because you want me to pay tax on the dividend. So when you talk about corporation tax rates, you have to figure out what they're really, really doing. And my information is that the current tax rates are almost never reached by any significant corporation because of the deductions and things that Congress builds in. So reducing the rates or increasing the rates would be one way. Another way you could adjust that if you wanted to is by deciding what they could deduct and what they can't. And that's how Congress actually, that's how they actually control it. So you can say, well, the effective corporate tax rate might be 20% apparently, but if they have deductions so that nobody's actually paying that 20%, where would you be? So, you know, you can sit here and say, well, let's make the tax rate X, but if you change the deductions that are available, it becomes meaningless. That's what's wrong with it now.
So, but I hear Democrats pretty much, this has been a big thing for a long time. You rarely hear Democrats say, let's lower the tax rate, especially the corporate tax rate. So what I'm hearing you say is you're not on board with, this is, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not on board with just an increase because it enables the Democrats to put through some sort of spending bill tied to a tax increase. This is what I'm kind of hearing you say. No?
Well, they're distantly related, but I recognize that there's this grandiose idea that, oh, you can come to the public with a tax increase plan by showing that you're going to magically get it from somewhere else so that the net result is zero change. Typically, that's an illusion. What governments do and what our government does especially well is kick the can down the road and come up with ideas about what's going to happen in the future. And therefore, we can plan that whatever tax increase or whatever we're trying to do will sort of be paid for. That tends to be not the way things actually work out. But I will say this. I certainly think that we're going to have to really look at tax policy. We're going to have to really look at where we're going to get money to do things we have to do. And we're going to have to look at where things are coming from to provide our revenue streams. Now, 25 years from now, very few people, in my opinion, are going to have jobs like we see today. And that's going to be because artificial intelligence, automation, all of the technical advances, they're going to make it strange for jobs. Right now, farmers are being, they're using tractors that are controlled by drones or satellites to automatically tend their fields. This is coming. I mean, machines are doing all kinds of mining and things like that. And in every aspect, I mean, you know, there's a little thing that runs out from under the counter and cleans up the floors. These things are coming, and we need to be prepared for that. And part of our tax policy needs to be, how do we get there, and how do we train the people that we're going to need trained to do the jobs that are then going to be available? You know, it's okay. We can all pretend like today is all that matters, but we need to be thinking about the future.
What are some big differences between you and your opponent? What do you think the key differences are?
I'm tempted to say almost everything, but well, we have dramatically different ideas about climate. I mean, I listened to, we were at a forum, and I listened to Mr. Clyde talk about, Congressman Clyde talk about, you know, his idea about the climate was there are 4 seasons, you know, the spring, winter, summer, and fall. And one of my friends says, yeah, and now in Georgia, we got a 5th one. It's called fire season. And so, you know, I don't think that his climate approach makes any sense. Second, we have dramatic differences. I mean, his website says that he opposes abortion at all times. You know, there's no time when he believes abortions can be made. I think that everybody that I talk to says there have to be exceptions on that issue. There are life of the mother, all those kind of things, rape and incest. But generally, I mean, he finds ways to avoid the rules. I mean, he refuses to pay fines that he's incurred for misbehaving. He's come up with this crazy, well, not crazy, I guess it works. He has all of his salary basically withheld as taxes so that the Congress can't take the fines that he owes them out of his salary. I mean, I'm for good government. I don't know what that is, but that doesn't sound like good government to me. And frankly, anybody who tells me that the attack on our Capitol was a normal tourist visit, I think has got some problems of perception. So that kind of hits the high spots, I guess.
Okay. Since you brought that up, these hearings that they're having regarding January 6th, they're pretty, well, they're one-sided. Are you okay with that?
Well, first of all, I don't agree with your premise.
You don't think they're one-sided?
No, I think that they are.
Well, what's the other side?
I don't know that there's an other side to truth. Either it's true or it isn't true. Facts are either correct or they're not facts. I think what these people are doing is delivering facts that a lot of people very much do not like to hear. Now, I don't know about you, but I have listened to most of these hearings and observed them on television. And what I hear being delivered are facts that a lot of people don't like. So I'm sorry, but I don't agree that people are entitled to their own facts. They're not.
Yes. Oh, I agree. I mean, who doesn't agree with that? But maybe not. Maybe all the facts aren't coming out.
Well, you know, that's an interesting statement. And all the people who would love to testify to bring all of these facts out, you know, Benny Thompson is standing there with open arms saying, hey, come talk. Let's deal with it. So, you know, if you think, Mr. Griffin, that there are some facts that need to be brought out, maybe you should help Benny Thompson out, or maybe, whoever it is that claims these facts aren't being brought out, maybe they ought to offer them. Frankly, I think that's nonsense. I don't think there are any facts that aren't coming out. What are they? What are these facts that are hidden? I don't know.
Well, it seems to me that, I mean, there's always two sides to a story. And
I'm
there's
sorry.
only the only people that are participating in the hearing it's one side. I mean, that's
Well, with all due respect to my friends in the media, and I'm going to just throw you in there with them, there's no such thing as two sides to the truth. I'm sorry. There's no such thing as that. That's nonsense. Even 4 and 5-year-olds understand that, They know when they did wrong. And here's the problem. If you want to say that the committee is being unfair, ask yourself why it is that they're being unfair. How are they being unfair? Now, I'm not on the committee. I don't get to do anything. But what they're doing is they're using Republican folks to talk about what other Republican folks did, knew, or have done. Now, my friends in the press frequently tell me what you just said. There's two sides to every story. And the answer to that is no, there's not. Because the job of a journalist is to report the facts, not the opinions, the facts. And if the facts are uncomfortable, that's just a problem. You can't do away with that. Now, I'm a data guy and I'm a truth guy. And if you want to talk about the truth, that's fine. But the truth is not a matter of opinion, nor is it a matter of opinion as to whether or not the sun comes up. It comes up. And it doesn't matter. You can sit over there if you're some sort of an extraterrestrial and say that, reality doesn't matter and reality is unknowable. Okay, but that's not the universe I live in. The universe I live in, truth matters, facts matter. And I'm sorry, but an awful lot of journalists, they run around and they stick their microphone in somebody's face and say, well, what do you think about that? Well, that's not your job. Your job isn't to give opinions. If it is, then why don't you claim that you do nothing but run an editorial page? That's not your job. Your job is to find the truth, find the facts, and deliver them to the public. Isn't that what journalists said they were supposed to do? That's what I learned in high school. What'd you learn? The same thing, I'm sure. So when people say there are two sides to every story, that's an illusion. There's not. Then you get into this he said, she said. He said, she said doesn't matter. What matters are what actually happened about what he said and she said.
I contend there's always two sides to the story. We disagree. You may not like the other the stories. One story may not be true, but there's always two sides. In my opinion. But I want to ask you this. Do you think there ought to be a national abortion law? And what would that look like for you?
Wow.
And
well,
you mentioned some carve outs. So just what restrictions would you place on a woman having an abortion? Or do you think there should not be a national law? The states should make their own laws?
Well, the problem with state laws is they are so ununiform. So I guess I would prefer to see a national law. I mean, we had one until the Supreme Court changed it. So now the law is, a free-for-all. Every state does whatever they want to do. The problems with abortion are, this is something that Richard Nixon kind of created, and everybody's been running around talking about it. Just for example, there's not one word in the Bible about abortion, and yet we have all of this religious connotation to it. And I understand the arguments about life and death, but we can't have craziness. Craziness is people who talk about carrying ectopic pregnancies to term, which means the mother and the would-be child both die. You can't have.
Who says that? I'm not familiar with that.
Well, there was a gentleman up in Ohio who wanted to do that. There's some people in Ohio who wanted to take the ectopic pregnancy out and insert it into the woman's womb so that somehow that would carry it to term. These things are nonsensical. And yet, unfortunately, apparently a lot of people don't even understand the biology involved. So you have to make exceptions for these things. Now, I don't believe that abortion has ever been a terrible problem in the United States for the last 50 years. I think it's relatively rare. I think that a lot of times people are forced into it because of economic circumstances or the facts of what happened, whether it's rape, whether it's incest or whatever. Those are big problems. So if you want to do an umbrella protection for everybody, so everybody understands the rules, then you probably should have a national law. I would be in favor of a national law. Now, while we're talking about that, I would remind everyone that we also have a Supreme Court who might decide they don't much like that law. So even if we did that, I'm not 100% sure that the Supreme Court, as it is currently constituted, would approve. But basically, I'm in favor of a national law. Now, working out the details, whether you want to talk about certain carve-outs, as you call them, rape, incest, ectopic pregnancies, life of the mother, all these kind of things, those should be in any law, state or federal. But I think that the current situation, for example, here in Georgia with our so-called heartbeat law, it by the time most women realize that they are pregnant, it's of no use to them. So I think we need, if we want to deal with it, I think nationally is the way to do it.
So what would that look like? Unfettered right?
Well, you have certain foolish individuals who think that people are having abortions at 9 months of pregnancy, which of course is not happening, but people can say that if they want to. I don't know.
You're saying that doesn't happen?
Yeah, show me
Okay.
where it does.
Okay.
So, but you also have situations where there are just incredible complications from what would ordinarily be a normal pregnancy. Unfettered? No, I think that there are reasonable restrictions. I think that most people seem to be satisfied with the rules in Roe versus Wade, and I don't think that's particularly onerous. I think most people can deal with that in their lives.
How many weeks I don't understand.
Well, I'm not advocating for a particular number of weeks. If you want to make it 20 weeks, or 25 or 28 or whatever, I think that's a matter that really should be addressed by medical professionals who can better help us understand that. I think a bunch of men sitting around deciding that's probably kind of stupid, but I think that the situation under Roe was not particularly onerous. So, whatever that would have been fine. But we could certainly add to that or subtract from it if it makes sense. I think the important thing is there has to be a meaningful opportunity. And that's to my way of thinking, that's really a medical question.
Well, no, sir, it'll be legislated. Legislators will decide. They might decide with getting advice from medical professionals. I mean, maybe there's some congressional hearings and you have medical professionals there. I understand you get advice, but at the end of the day, the legislators decide if it's a national law.
Well, of course they do, but they presumably they have enough good sense and common sense to take the medical advice and implement it. And that's what I'm suggesting.
Yes, I understand. So you are saying there should be some restrictions, not an unfettered right.
Never thought that it should be unfettered.
Okay, okay. I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that.
I'm not sure that I know anybody who thinks it should be unfettered.
What about public funding
Of what?
for women to get abortions?
I don't know why it should be any different than any other medical procedure.
So you're fine with public funding?
If I'm not sure what public funding means in this context.
The government pays for the abortion, not the individual.
Well, what does that mean? I mean, does that mean if you're on Medicaid or if you have private insurance, or what does that mean? Does that mean it's supposed to be covered if it's not covered by private insurance? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Should the government fund elective abortions, in your view? Should the federal government fund elective abortions?
I think that it should fund it just like it does every other medical procedure.
Okay, well, I think I've got that. I think I've got that down. I want to ask you one more question about, and you've been very kind with your time. I really appreciate it. I want to ask you one more question about the immigration. You mentioned it was disastrous. What specifically is disastrous that you mentioned?
Well, I understood you to say integration. I think you mean
Sorry,
immigration.
I said immigration. Sorry.
Immigration. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what is a disaster? I mean, we've got people stacked up at the border. We got children being held in cages. We got parents and children we can't even connect to each other. We've got, in my judgment, foolish people who think building a wall is going to stop people from climbing over the wall. I mean, or tunneling under the wall. We have to deal with people who are coming to our country. Now, my brother and I strongly disagree on this, but my view is if you have people who are leaving a desperate situation, who are coming to our country as refugees, we certainly ought to be willing to take a look at that and try to help them. How we do that, the devil is always in the detail. We have a bunch of people that are stacked up in Mexico and so forth. Why is that happening? We seem to be unable to control who's coming in, and once they get in, what we're going to do with them. Well, why don't we fund enough so that we can have hearings right then and there and decide these kinds of issues? And then you've got the limitations, the quotas. I mean, you want to go back to you know, when there was a quota against Chinese or quotas against other countries. You remember NINA, no Irish need apply, all those kind of things. So we've got to come up with some approach that makes sense. And what we're doing is nothing. We're not doing anything. I mean, look, everybody's not going to get everything they want. These supposed two sides, I'm not sure they're two sides, but everybody's not going to get everything they want. And insisting on that gives us the stalemate we're at right now. That's what the nightmare is. There's nothing happening. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's hard. Well, you know, let's do something. Isn't 75% of something better than 100% of nothing? Let's do something to try to fix this.
Do you think there ought to be, this is kind of from your, something that you list on your website, an issue, I should say. Do you think there ought to be a national voting law?
Yes, we had one recently. It went away with the Supreme Court. Yeah, I think we should.
Do you think it's part of that law? Do you think it's unreasonable for citizens to believe that voting ought to be done in secrecy?
What?
In confidence.
The secret ballot? Is that
Yes,
what
sir.
you're asking?
Yes, sir.
Of course. I mean, isn't that how we've done it? We've done it that way since I can remember.
Voting by mail is not done in secret. Does not have to be done in secret.
Oh, I see. In other words, you're saying whether or not there should be some particular concern about how a voting by mail ballot is filled out? Is that what you're asking, really?
People will say this to me, maybe in jest, but I'm sure other people are serious. I have 4 people in my household. I get 4 votes now.
I don't doubt that that happens in some occasions or in some situation.
So
Any more than
you think it's unreasonable for people to think that that ought to be done in secret, and voting by mail cannot be done secretly, so they are against voting by mail? Do you think that's unreasonable?
Well, I don't agree with your premise. First of all,
How's
it is
that?
easy. It is easy to do a vote by mail in secret. Nothing stops a person from taking a ballot wherever they want to take it and do whatever they want to do in secret. Now,
Not if mama gets the ballot first, sir.
well, I completely disagree with that statement.
So, all right, so I understand you sounds like you're in favor of voting by mail then.
Well, yeah, there are certain states where that's all they do. Works just fine.
And there's no way to know how many votes are observed, coerced, bought, sold, people are intimidated, threatened. There's no way to know how often that happens, correct?
Well, your premise is a little cloudy, in my opinion. First of all, I don't know why you would assume that all of that happens. I wonder
I'm
why.
saying there is no way you know how often it happens. There's no way I can know how often it happens. So that was one of the big things, just talking to people, the last election, people vote by mail. We don't know how often this happens. It's unknowable.
Well, I agree with you that there's no way to know for sure how something happened if you don't observe it. That's true.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Very simple. Well, you said we can't know what happens if nobody's there to observe it.
Correct. Yes.
And that's what I'm saying to you. You're absolutely right. And I
Right.
think that concern is nonsensical. I think it's blown completely out of
How would
proportion.
you know that though?
How would I know what?
You say it's nonsensical
Sure.
because it's unknowable.
No, I didn't say it was nonsensical because it was unknowable. I'll say that it's nonsensical because I don't think there's any rational belief that this is going on in any significant manner.
But you can't know that. So how is it nonsensical?
Well, I just explained that to you.
You just feel that it doesn't happen.
No.
So there,
Now,
I don't understand.
Okay. All right, let's approach it this way. You apparently have a belief that this is a problem that needs solving. I have the belief that that's a problem that's been manufactured. There are states that have vote by mail that have been going on forever. Absolutely. There are certainly circumstances that probably exist when somebody says to somebody else that they have control over it, you will vote this way and I will watch you vote it. I can see that happening. That's also a crime. Do you understand that? Don't shake your head at me. Either you understand it or you don't. It's a crime.
I understand it, but it's not,
Okay.
it's being almost impossible to prosecute.
I doubt that very seriously, that it would be impossible to prosecute.
Okay.
But my point is, you're talking about criminal behavior. So what you're inviting people to believe is there's a whole bunch of crime going on out there.
No,
I don't think people.
you're putting, I really haven't asserted anything with you other than the fact that we cannot know how often this happens. And you're telling me you're fine with it. And a lot of people are unreasonable for not being fine with it. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, you need to play it back and listen to it again.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm hearing you say it can happen, but it's not reasonable to want people to vote in secret.
Didn't say
Mandated.
that either.
Okay. Okay. So if it's a national voting law, you'd fine with voting by mail, universal voting by mail. That's what I'm understanding.
I don't see anything wrong with it.
Okay. Okay. And I think a lot of people do see a lot wrong with it for the reasons that I'm talking about. But at any rate, you're fine with it, and a lot of people aren't. Okay. Was there anything else you'd like to add? Because we'll give you an opportunity to add anything else before we wrap up. Not on that particular topic, just any topic.
I understand. Well, first of all, thank you for putting up with me. I can be cantankerous too.
Thank you for putting up with me too.
And I'll do a political statement, but it's heartfelt. I'm in favor of good government. That seems simple, but if you've been watching anything that's been going on in our country for the last couple of years, maybe decades, good government's hard to come by. We have to have people in Washington that respect the working people, that understand issues. And you and I had a pretty good debate, which means there are different sides to things. You're not going to always get everything you want. You have to try as a representative. You're one of 435 votes. That's what it comes down to. You're a small fish in a big pond. So you have to try to do your best to represent the best interests of the people you represent. And that's basic good government. That's what you're supposed to do. I believe that I represent that, and I think I can do that. I don't always agree with people. There are a lot of people, you and I obviously disagree greatly about voting by mail, but you know what? I'll do my dead level best to defend your civil rights and your inalienable rights to the best of my ability. And I will not lie to you. That's me.
Well, thank you for that. I agree with your sentiments about rights, especially the right to free speech. There seems to be in society now this thing to hate speech. People want to get rid of hate speech, but hate speech is protected. So I feel the same way you do about people's rights, especially the right to free speech, because it's important to hear what other people that disagree with you, so you can test your own assumptions and make sure you're on solid ground, that sort of thing. Sorry to add that.
No, if you want to talk about,
but I think we agree upon that.
I'm guessing. I mean, I don't know where this whole concept of hate speech comes from exactly, but we've had what you could call hate speech for a long time in this country. Goes back to the formation, actually. You can't control that, but you don't have the right to shout fire in a crowded theater. You don't. And so I think the problem is when it borderlines whether or not you're calling people out to do things that are illegal, that's where it crosses the line. And I don't think you're in favor of that either. So
unprotected, and then you get into an argument about what if that's actually what happened and so forth. So well, listen, how do people find you?
Well, Mike, number 4, Georgia, is our website, and we're easy to contact that way. That would be my suggested method. If you go to the website, you'll find all of the other contact information that you could possibly want.
Okay, it's I think I ought to spell it out for folks. MIKE, the number 4,
Georgia,
spelled out, Georgia.com.
Yes.
And I suppose you're on Facebook and that sort of thing.
Yes, sir.
Well, thanks again, and best of luck to you.
Well, thank you for having me. We had a good time.
Well, appreciate it. I'm glad you had fun. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.